This is your reality check.
Hi everyone, and welcome to The Reality Check, the weekly Canadian show that explores a wide range of controversies and curiosities using science and critical thinking. This is the show for October 1st, 2019, and I'm your host, Darren McKee. With me, as usual, are Adam Gardner.
What's up, Cuboids?
Christina Roach.
Hey everyone.
And producer Pat.
Hi, Checkers.
We have a great show for you today. Christina is going to look into whether plant-based burgers are healthier. And I'm going to talk to you about the death of Bruce Lee. And then Adam is going to explore whether the OK hand sign is a hate symbol. But first, a few quick corrections. I did a segment recently about the Canadian election season and our parliamentary system, and I made a couple errors. One is that I said our members of parliament are ministers of parliament. That's not true. When you elect someone, they become an MP, a member of parliament, and then some of those members are ministers if they are part of the government and they are chosen to lead a department or something like that. Secondly, when I was talking about the U.S. system, I said the Congress, referring to the House of Representatives, and that's not quite true either. The Congress is made up of the House of Representatives and the Senate. They are separate things which make up the Congress. So thank you for those for writing in, and I'll try to be less sloppy in the future. And now, when I eat plant-based burgers, I assume they're healthier. Christina, please tell me I'm right.
Well, plant-based is the new buzzy term when marketing vegan food. And the Beyond Meat burger and the Impossible burger, which mimic the look and taste of real meat, are all the rage right now. Now, although we can't get Impossible burgers north of the border yet, Beyond Meat is booming here in Canada. The A&W was the first chain to introduce Beyond Meat to we the north and sold out the first week. Then Tim Hortons, now grocery stores, and select McDonald's locations will carry a PLT, plant, lettuce, tomato sandwich.
Plant sandwich.
Now, Beyond Meat went public this year, boasting the best performing IPO in 20 years and have many celebrity fans from NBA stars to investors like Bill Gates and Leo DiCaprio. A Beyond Burger is made up of 20 grams of protein from peas and mung beans, which I'd never heard of, but they are a legume cultivated in East Asia, Southeast Asia, and Indian subcontinent for the most part.
Mung? M-U-N-G?
Correct.
Oh, okay.
The burger's fat comes from coconut and canola oil, and the secret to their redness that mimics meat is beaten pomegranate. We know there's a myriad of personal and environmental reasons people choose vegetarian or vegan diets, while others, like me, who still eat meat, have cut back their intake. But one thing I'm seeing some people suggest is that plant-based burgers are healthier for you, which is fueled by animal rights activists and the creators of the widely debunked documentary, What the Health? So are they really healthier? What do you guys think?
I would assume so, based on the general idea I have that red meat is unhealthy, which is something that I'm starting to question a bit.
Well, health breaks down into many different types of things which could be healthy or unhealthy. Might they have more salt? Might they have something else that makes up to the taste? They're probably less likely to cause cancer that certain red meats may in fact cause, but I think it really depends on what you might mean.
I'm going to agree with Darren that they're likely putting a lot of fat into it in order to make it taste kind of like meat. I think all the other reasons that you would eat plant-based foods are probably solid, like factory farming and good for the planet and all that jazz, but better for you, I'm not so sure about that.
All right. So The Atlantic published an article by Annie Lowry last week titled "Plant-Based Food Entrepreneurs Are Marketing Their Meatless Products to Omnivores." And we do have evidence to support that curbing meat consumption makes sense for animals and our planet. Pat just made a couple of examples. A research study that Lowry cites says, quote, "Roughly 2/3 of Americans report reducing their meat consumption, and many are sensitive to the way their diet might be damaging the planet." Now, she cites a few specific examples, but the gist is that omnivores are on the same page as vegans on their reasoning to cut back on their meat consumption. These plant-based meat companies get that, and they are all over it. A Nielsen article from July breaks down the stats, and only about 5% of U.S. households are vegan or vegetarian. Certainly not enough consumers, in my mind, to fuel the current plant-based burger craze. However, 98%, and I thought this was higher than I expected, 98% of people who purchased meat alternatives also purchased meat. Many thinking that if a burger is made from vegetables, it must be good for you, right? Let's be clear, a vegetarian diet is not necessarily healthier than an omnivorous diet. In the case of plant-based burgers, Consumers Reports expert Amy Keating told CTV, both burgers have ultra-processed ingredients like soy concentrates, isolates, oils, and flavors. They have similar amounts of saturated fat, but much more sodium than regular beef, to your point, Darren.
Salty.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. The Impossible Burger also contains an ingredient called soy leghemoglobin to give their burgers this like bloody look and texture of real beef. Now, I don't know much about this ingredient, so I'm not meaning to sound any alarms. But Keating's colleague, Rachel Rapkin-Peachman says, quote, "We've never eaten soy leghemoglobin before, and scientists just don't know enough about it yet. Is it safe? Maybe. But without additional research, we don't know for sure." For the record, the Impossible Foods company issued a statement saying any studies they completed on the ingredient showed no risk of toxicity. I think Gizmodo's Ryan Mandelbaum gets it the most with his article, Impossible Burgers Aren't Healthy, and that's the whole point. It's actually a pretty funny article if you want to check it out in our show notes. Now, if we want to eat healthier, then we should eat vegetables, whole grains, fruits, minimize sugar and processed food, all the stuff we already know we should be doing. And if you're really looking for a healthier, meatless burger, experts suggest steering clear of the ones that try to mimic meat. In other words, you shouldn't eat a Beyond Meat or Impossible Burger every day, just like you shouldn't eat a hamburger every day. Now, even Impossible Foods' mission statement doesn't harp on the health of its burgers. I believe they use the word nutrition, but this is their objective, quote, "to drastically reduce humanity's destructive impact on the global environment by completely replacing the use of animals as a food production technology." Okay, of course, the minute I was done my segment last night and I was chilling, I was catching up on the news before heading to bed, I came across a New York Times article, "Eat less red meat," scientists said. Now some believe that was bad advice. And I didn't realize that Adam had also picked up on a La Presse article about the same thing. So I felt I should briefly touch upon this and preempt any checkers writing in about it. Now here's a quote from the news piece. "Public health officials for years have urged Americans to limit consumption of red meat and processed meats because of concerns that these foods are linked to heart disease, cancer, and other ills. But on Monday, in a remarkable turnabout, an international collaboration of researchers produced a series of analyses concluding that the advice, a bedrock of almost all dietary guidelines, is not backed by good scientific evidence. The health effects of red meat consumption are detectable only in the largest groups, researchers concluded, and advice to individuals to cut back may not be justified by available data." So, the leader of this group is Bradley Johnson, an epidemiologist at Dalhousie U in Canada, and man, did they get some fierce criticism. The American Heart Association, the American Cancer Society, the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, and many others have, quote, savaged the findings and the journal that published them. Now, some are asking the editors to delay publication of the research, and scientists from Harvard have warned that the conclusions, quote, harm the credibility of nutrition science and erode public trust in scientific research. So we'll definitely keep an eye on how this one unfolds. Mm-hmm. And then we can dig into details for you guys on a future show. But that doesn't change my conclusion that plant-based burgers are simply not healthier just because the word plant is in the title.
I would think nutrition science harms its own reputation as good science. It's just hard to do, to be most charitable. It's really hard to do, so then there's a lot of conflicting findings. It doesn't mean people are doing bad research more so than anywhere else. It's just often hard to do.
Yeah, you can have a plausible biological mechanism that isn't really played out in the data, which seems to be what's maybe going on with this red meat. And I think that comment's a little sad. If the field is respectable, it should be open to evidence which questions earlier findings, or, let's understand this study and incorporate it into the existing body of knowledge, maybe to tweak our confidence level. Maybe the idea is still not that bad.
As a counterpoint, one bad study can cause decades of harm.
Absolutely.
The Lancet publishing the autism vaccine thing, we're still dealing with it.
Yeah.
So if this isn't rigorous and legit enough, it
Absolutely.
could cause unnecessary harm.
Yeah.
Thank you, Cristina. And now, the death of Bruce Lee. Be water, my friend. Those words probably sound familiar to any Bruce Lee fans who are listening. They may bring fond memories to mind of Lee's charisma and physical prowess, and perhaps his iconic yellow jumpsuit, which was an homage in Kill Bill, not an original. But some fans might wonder, how exactly did Bruce Lee die? I recently finished an excellent biography of Bruce Lee by Matthew Pauly called Bruce Lee, A Life, if anyone is interested. And as such, I've been thinking about Bruce Lee for many hours in these past weeks. How did someone so young and vibrant die? In this segment, I'll talk about the conspiracy theories, the main consensus, and then a recent theory by the biographer Pauly.
Oh.
First, a general point. There's a ton of ink that's been spilled on how John F. Kennedy was killed. Not exactly how, because pretty much everyone agrees he was shot, but who shot him and why. In a similar way, Bruce Lee was a larger-than-life figure. Dying on July 20th, 1973, he was only 32, and he seemed to be in his physical prime. Much like people have trouble believing Kennedy could be shot by one man, people have trouble believing Bruce Lee might have died from something relatively uncomplicated. I also want to mention that at the time of his death, Bruce Lee was incredibly popular in Hong Kong. His two recent movies were record breakers, one being the best-selling movie of all time in Hong Kong. So it was just on the cusp of greatness and international fame, but he was already very, very famous in Hong Kong. So it's almost like a Kanye level of fame, or maybe, say The Rock, if he was in his 30s and died in the apartment of his mistress. People are interested in these sorts of things.
Yeah, and there's so many conspiracy theories.
Is that still true, Darren, that he's got the #1 movie of all time, like above Jackie Chan?
I'm not sure, Pat, but I do know that in the book they said Jackie Chan was the only person to actually reach American-level stardom, similar to Bruce Lee. It took 3 to 4 decades.
Yeah.
And there's only 2 of them. Here are some of the more popular, but less plausible reasons for Bruce Lee's death. He was killed by the Chinese triads because he refused to pay them protection money. Number 2, he was killed by experts in the Chinese martial arts community because they hated he taught foreigners. They did, but there's no evidence that they actually killed him.
Sure.
3, maybe it wasn't the triads, but it was the mafia that had plans for him in Hollywood, and Lee wouldn't cooperate. Number 4, something about his friend and mistress, actress Betty Ting Pei, killed him for one reason or another. And number 5, a curse, of course.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, boy.
Sure.
He died from a curse, and that it was only further validated in 1993 when Lee's actor's son, Brandon Lee, died after being shot by a faulty prop gun on the set of The Crow. There is little evidence for any of these. So what is the more official version of the events? And yes, in this day and age, the official version is on Wikipedia. Quote, on May 10th, 1973, Lee collapsed during an automated dialogue replacement session for Enter the Dragon at Golden Harvest Studios in Hong Kong. Suffering from seizures and headaches, he was immediately rushed to Hong Kong Baptist Hospital, where doctors diagnosed cerebral edema. They were able to reduce the swelling through the administration of mannitol. The headache and cerebral edema that occurred in his first collapse, this is the May 10th one, were later repeated on the day of his death, July 20th. That's from context. So on the 20th, 1973, Lee was in Hong Kong to have dinner with actor George Lazenby, with whom he intended to make a film. According to his wife, Linda, Lee met producer Raymond Chow at 2 p.m. at home to discuss the making of the film Game of Death. They worked until about 4 and then drove together to the home of Lee's colleague, Betty Ting Pei, the Taiwanese actress. The 3 went over the script at Ting's home, and then Chow left to attend a dinner meeting. Later, Lee complained of a headache, and Ting gave him the painkiller Equagesic, which contained both aspirin and tranquilizer meprobamate. Around 7:30 p.m., he went to lie down for a nap. When Lee did not come for dinner, Chow came to the apartment, and he was unable to wake Lee up. A doctor was summoned and spent 10 minutes attempting to revive Lee before sending him by ambulance to Queen Elizabeth Hospital. Lee was declared dead on arrival at age 32. Death caused by acute cerebral edema due to a reaction to compounds present in combination medication Equagesic. That's the main story. Now, in the book that I read, Bruce Lee, A Life, that is not what happened, at least in terms of the narrative structure of events. A lot of this is branding and image management. Yes, he did collapse. Yes, he took the medication. And yes, he was dead on arrival. But if you go for the sources from the book, some criticize it as being a bit gossipy, but I think it's pretty rigorous as far as I can tell. Okay. He was having an affair with Betty Ting Pei.
Okay.
He went to her house for a nooner, so to speak, and he was there for multiple hours. Then Raymond Chow came over. Then Bruce Lee did say he wasn't feeling well and went to lay down. It was very hot that day in Hong Kong. It was one of the hottest days on record. And then she tried to wake him up later, Betty Ting-pei, and she couldn't wake Bruce Lee up. For all intents and purposes, he was dead.
Yeah.
They called a doctor. Doctor came, couldn't revive him. It's been a while. He's going to die. But it'd be better if Lee didn't go to the closer hospital, because then it would raise suspicion that he was at his mistress's apartment when he died. So it's better to send him at the hospital that's 20 minutes away, which they did. All this came up in an inquest of sorts.
Yeah.
So it's like, and this story kind of lasted for 3 days before the media then figured out something wasn't right.
Yeah.
And then, of course, once something isn't true, what else are they hiding? Right?
Yeah.
Like, this is, again, you picture like The Rock somehow dying at a mistress's place, and then you find out they're lying about it, and he already died, and he was sent to a different hospital. Why is that? All these questions come up.
Yeah.
Seems problematic.
Well, there doesn't necessarily need to be foul play, but then you get into things like, well, did the longer trip to the hospital become a factor?
Well, it's from the book, you're given the impression he was dead in the apartment.
Dead, yeah.
And then they were just trying to figure out something that, like, they knew it is very important he does not die at this apartment optically.
Yeah.
Was it cannabis? That was a big factor.
Okay.
Because at that time it was illegal. Sure. Bruce Lee did take cannabis sometimes. If he did take cannabis before he signed an insurance policy, which was worth millions, it would have avoided the insurance policy. The insurance policy was signed several months before he died.
Oh, boy.
If he took cannabis afterwards, then it wouldn't. Okay? Yeah, he was also a big pothead, apparently.
Yeah.
So there was a 3-panel inquiry of sorts and a judge that was overseeing it. Now, at that time, Hong Kong is under British control, right? And the most famous Chinese movie star in the world has died under suspicious circumstances. Yeah. And drugs are also illegal in Hong Kong. And the British can't be interfering too much with what's happened, but you also can't have it'd be too problematic. So it was sort of like, we're going to have an inquest and we're going to nudge it in certain directions. Yeah. And so there were like 7 main reasons why he could have died, which the 3-panel so-called jury was supposed to comment on. And the judge, which is atypically, is like, well, it's not number 1. Like, he kind of went through the list. He's like, well, there's not much evidence for 1, not much evidence for 2. So really it's kind of between 3, 4, and 5. So usually it's sort of not leading the witness, but leading the jury. Yeah. All that to say is that seems all very suspicious. So he did die. It was very hot. He was reenacting scenes from the movie that he was filming. Now someone else then is like, she had an air conditioner. It wouldn't have been that hot in there, right? So I don't know if the air conditioner was on, but apparently it was one of the hottest days in Hong Kong.
Sure. Why
that's relevant is that in the biography, Pauly consulted with medical experts and theorized that Lee died from cerebral edema, which is swelling of the brain. That's still true, but this was caused by overexertion and heat stroke.
Oh.
Heat stroke was not considered at the time because it was a poorly understood condition. And even now we're like, really? Heat stroke?
He died of heat stroke, yeah. Wow.
Yes. And so that would also explain his first collapse because it was also very hot and he was working out. Yeah. Lee actually had his underarm sweat glands removed in late 1972.
Wow.
Yes. In the belief that the underarm sweat was unphotogenic on film, right? So that would then perhaps reduce his ability to diffuse temperature.
Sure.
Also, he was practicing, as I said, in that really hot temperature day on May 10th and July 20th, which exacerbated the heat stroke, and that turned into the cerebral edema that led to his death. There was no visible external injury, but according to the autopsy, his brain had swollen considerably from 1,400 to 1,575 grams, a 13% increase. So reading the book, I was convinced, well, okay, the cerebral edema, that seems to be true. Everyone seems to agree on that. It could have been due to a negative reaction to this drug, but it also could be due to something like heat stroke. He does not seem to be murdered. He did not seem to have any of those suspicious, sketchy, conspiratorial things. More that he was pushing himself for months. He was working out. He was even smaller and weighed less than he used to. I think he was down to like 120 something as opposed to 140. Mm-hmm. And he was probably exhausted from months and months and months and stuff, and it could have been heat stroke.
But the idea that a truly incredible physical specimen could die from heat stroke is pretty incredible.
Right. That's the idea that how could it possibly happen? Right?
But it's also because he was at that edge, right, of fitness where, you know, his body fat is low and things.
Correct.
Like
yeah, body fat very low, pushing himself all the time under the stress. Like his movie, which was going to change his life, was just about to break in the States. Mm-hmm. And as I said, like, this happens to people. I think at least one American football player, at least in practice in high school, dies each year from heat stroke. It's just something you don't hear about. Again, one death is not necessarily a lot, but people don't think of heat stroke killing a lot of young people in their prime. Yeah. That's for sure. So yeah, it was a great book. Saddening, of course, that think more about his death, but what an incredible human who achieved a lot. If I give someone the OK symbol, am I now a hate monger?
That's a great question, Darren. Now, we're currently in the middle of the German OK-Toberfest. This takes place during the month of OK-Tober, which in the German calendar is a month in which there is a lot of beer consumption, which makes everything A-OK. So if any listeners are thinking of writing in to correct me, I will remind them that I used to be married to a German woman, so I know what I'm talking about. Danke very much. Now, you may have heard that the OK sign is now a hate symbol. I heard about this a lot in the last couple of days. I'd heard about it a while back, but more recently it was reported on heavily because it was added to a list by the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League. They officially stated that the OK symbol is now a hate symbol. Now, what's all that about? So first, let's cover a bit of the basics. For those that may not know, as the symbol name it doesn't seem to be universally known across the whole globe, the OK symbol is done by touching the tip of one's index to their thumb, making a circle, and holding out the 3 other fingers on the hand. It's also referred to as the OK gesture or ring gesture. That is one I have never heard before. The symbol has a rich history that I imagine some of it doesn't have much to do with its current usage. For example, the ancient Greeks used it to mean love, as the index and thumb touching was like a kiss. Buddhist and Hindu art sometimes displays it to describe inner perfection, and was apparently used in its current form to mean approval as early as the 1st century of Rome. Now, in the 19th century, there is some evidence that the gesture mimicked the letters O and K, which are like a misspelled version of all correct. So all with an O and correct with a K. I guess misspelling was kind of popular and trendy at the time. That's kind of odd, but
misspelling was popular.
Yep. Misspelling is cool. Now, it's generally used today in Western cultures, specifically in scuba diving, where one can't talk, right? And you say, okay, it's all good. The symbol is considered vulgar in some cultures, symbolizing an anus, which can either mean the person you're showing it to is an asshole, or it can reference homosexuality or sodomy. So be careful where you flash that OK sign. So what about this hate symbol? Is the OK sign a white power symbol, as some people are saying? Now, many news articles are mentioning that this started on 4chan. In 2017, users of 4chan decided to start a hoax where they pretended the OK symbol was a white power movement symbol to sort of troll people into outlawing a completely innocuous symbol. Well, it sounds like maybe the Anti-Defamation League got trolled and it really worked. But there's a bit more to it than that. Now, prior to the 4chan campaign, there were already some in the media suggesting that the OK symbol was a hate symbol. A few images prior to the February 27th, 2017 4chan post show so-called alt-right figures such as Milo Yiannopoulos and Malik Obama, who are showing the OK sign. Now, I think Malik Obama, a black man, is probably not a white supremacist, but whatever. Now, the first instance mentioned in the Know Your Meme page has a conservative who goes by Pizza Party Ben doing an OK symbol, stating, "White guys be like." White guys be like doing the OK symbol, I guess. Now, it does not seem that this was ever meant as a hate symbol or a white nationalist symbol. However, on February 13th, 2017, the right-wing Jim Hoft and Lucian Wintrich were photographed making the OK symbol. And then Media Matters for America, a watchdog group that reacts to conservatives, reported that this was a hate symbol and that it was a racist Pepe hand signal. That is a reference to Pepe the Frog, who is a cartoon frog, which was not created by conservatives, but was kind of co-opted by conservatives, much to the creator's chagrin. Now, this was largely mocked, and then the 4chan push came out to make the symbol seem like a white power sign. So that whole 4chan origin is legitimate, but it did follow an original wave of people thinking this is some sort of hate symbol. Now, the ADL seems to buy the 4chan origin of the story, and I quote from their description of the OK hand gesture. A common hand gesture that 4chan trolling campaign claimed in 2017 had been appropriated as a symbol meaning white power. Used by many on the right, not just extremists, for the purpose of trolling liberals, the symbol eventually came to be used by actual white supremacists as well. Caution must be used in evaluating instances of this symbol's use. So when you read this description, it really sounds like they know that it wasn't originally a hate symbol, as Media Matters for America originally claimed. As for whether or not it's really used as a white power symbol, it doesn't seem like the ADL is all that sure or making a terribly definitive statement about it. So it's really, their description is really couched in a lot of language that kind of says like, you know what, it's probably just an okay symbol if you see it, but we want to let you know of this history of it. So has the OK sign really been completely ruined because of this? Well, it depends on how people react to this, but the inclusion in the ADL's list alone should not mean that it's now obsolete as a harmless hand gesture. Note that the ADL's hate symbol database has 214 entries, which include a lot of things which have other more innocuous uses, such as 100%, the numbers 12, 13, 14, 18, 28, 38, and 43. Amongst others. Okay? Now, obviously, simply using this number doesn't mean much, and I don't think the list is meant to describe that, but it's sort of, if you see these with other factors, maybe it could mean something. Now, other hand gestures could very well mean other things. The Aryan fist is listed, and it's mentioned that it was adopted from the Black Power fist. So obviously, from their own description, this gesture alone cannot, with much certainty, be considered to be a white nationalist symbol. Boots and laces is on the list. It's mentioned that racist skinheads prefer wearing steel-toed work boots, typically with red or white shoelaces laced a certain way. Now, when I was a teenager, this was always something people would say when they would see someone with Doc Marten boots. Now, the bowl cut, and this is a type of bad haircut. Please don't leave a 1-star review on iTunes if you like this haircut. This is apparently now being used by supporters of a mass killer. I won't name the mass killer, but a mass killer who had the same haircut. The Coors beer logo is also on the list because a group named Comrades of Our Racial Struggle used a COORS logo, and sometimes they use the actual Coors beer logo. So the Coors beer logo is on there. And there's an entry on the list titled German Phrases because some neo-Nazis or skinheads use German or German-like words or phrases. So this is obviously pretty vague. Could involve a lot of people. The McDonald's Moon Man logo is apparently a white supremacist logo. Thought that was interesting. Pit bulls are supposedly a favorite dog of white supremacists, and one symbol called the triangular clan symbol is listed in the database, but what is not mentioned in the description is that it is basically the Triforce from The Legend of Zelda. Now, there's also something called the Tyr rune, which basically looks like an up arrow. So there's a lot of things that could be something else in this list. That's just a few. I did scan through all 214. These ones jumped out at me. I think a lot of attention is being put on the OK symbol, but in the context of the vast number of things on the ADL site, it seems to fit right in. It doesn't seem inappropriate for them to list this or label it or mention it, and their description seems accurate based on an understanding, even though they kind of ignore that original history. Now, this isn't some legally binding decision to categorize a hand symbol as a hate symbol. It's just one group listing it among many things, and there's a lot of groups that monitor hate groups and literature and things like that. But since there's so much attention being given to it by the press, I worry that this reaction itself will maybe give the symbol a negative connotation, perhaps somewhat jokingly, which might serve to give the classification a bit more validation than it would normally need. Things get added to this list that people don't even see, but because this one's getting a lot of press, who knows what that'll cause, right? Now, ultimately, one needs to treat such things very carefully. While one may find use in identifying some symbols or tattoos, which could be identified as a hate symbol, more specifically a white nationalist symbol or a Nazi symbol, as the ADL is an organization focusing on anti-Semitism, one must be careful not to cast too wide a net with some very generic things like the ones I've mentioned. Much like the Doc Marten boots, with almost any colored shoelaces, the suggestion that something could be a hate symbol is likely to be misinterpreted by a lot of people. So is the OK symbol a white nationalist hate symbol? Not really, but a lot of people, some of whom may be white nationalists, think it's funny to make people think it is. So its addition to a very large list of hate symbols is getting a lot of attention precisely because most people acknowledge that it's commonly used for other reasons, mainly to say okay. And I certainly hope this press doesn't convince people that this is a racist hand gesture, making the OK symbol go out of style faster than the Charlie Chaplin mustache in the 1940s. But only time will tell how people will react to this news in the long run.
Actually, I have a similar story. I had a T-shirt that, if you guys remember several years back, there were some, what they call patent trolls who went after podcasting.
Yes.
Do you guys remember this?
Adam
Like
Carolla.
about 5, 6, 7 years ago?
They tried to patent the concept of podcasting. Was that it? Is that what we're talking
Yeah.
about?
Right. They're going right after podcasting. So
Yep.
Adam Carolla, Mark Maron, a lot of the big podcasters got behind this. They raised some money to fight them in court. And one of the ways that they tried to raise money was to have people support it through kind of a Kickstarter type thing, and they'd give you rewards. And so as a podcaster, I got behind it, gave one of the larger donations to the cause, and got a T-shirt and a hat and a bunch of different things. Well, I used to wear that T-shirt a lot, and people would look at me really funny when I wore the T-shirt, and I loved it. It was really comfortable. But all of a sudden, I realized it looks exactly like the Aryan fist.
Like a fist, yeah.
Holding
so it's
a
like
microphone.
a resist kind of symbol or something like that, right?
Right. So it was a fist holding a microphone, and it said, "They hold the patents, we hold the power." So it had the word power in it as well.
Yeah.
And then I just realized that maybe I didn't want to wear that T-shirt anymore.
Yeah, and that's the day that Pat got rid of that T-shirt.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting, like, where the context becomes specific, right? So, like, if you were a black person wearing a T-shirt with that fist on it, and it said power, you would think, well, maybe it says black power. But since you're obviously a white person wearing that shirt, people might take it differently, right? So
I find all of it quite interesting, how symbols are used at certain times and are thought to mean different things at different times, right? Because culture changes, or because some people are intentionally trying to drive it forward in a certain way. And what is the threshold, right? Yeah. Nowadays, I really think, and it's hard to get evidence for this, but there's a small amount of people, often on Twitter, that are driving a conversation that is just not happening for almost everyone else. And then because people think it's happening, then they end up having this conversation, which is usually someone's outraged about something, right?
Yeah.
So in this case, if a couple people use this symbol, like, well, what counts? 5, 10 people, 10 instances, 15 instances? Does that mean no one else can use it? If 90% of the people use it and they don't mean anything, but 20% of the time when white nationalists use it, they do mean something white nationalistic. It's such a tricky thing to do. It's not to say, of course, that some symbols aren't definitely associated with certain movements. Sure. But as we know, things change over time, and certainly their meaning. As Adam was just saying, if there was a Black Power fist, the Black Panthers used to be a quite different thing. But now if you say Black Panther, like, you mean that cool movie? And it's just like things do change dramatically, and they're seen in different ways. Thank you, Adam. And thank you for joining us once again, listeners. Christina told us that plant-based burgers are probably not any healthier than the average burger, so eat it, but there's still maybe good reasons to have plant-based burgers instead of so-called real burgers. Yeah. I explored the death of Bruce Lee, who did die from a swelling of the brain, which may have been due to heat stroke. But what an incredible human. And finally, Adam looked at the OK hand symbol, and for some people, it may legitimately be a hate symbol, but for most of us, I think that is not the case. Until next time, think better, tack better.
Peace out, Cuboids.
Stay classy, not smartassy.
We'll talk to you next week, everyone.
For show notes or to discuss this episode, visit our Facebook page and website at trcpodcast.com. For general inquiries or to send a topic or parody suggestion, email info@trcpodcast.com. Help support the show by leaving a review on iTunes and liking us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter at @TRC_podcast.
There was like a...
Sorry, Pat and I were just giggling because you were like, did he take cannabis?
the pot.
Did he, he smoked weed?
The weed, the ganja.